This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers, that is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 641, entitled, "Are Masculists mostly upper middle class?" Description: are most Masculists upper middle class? Yes, since the Masculists are a minority amongst the MGTOWs in the manosphere. All new ideas start in the mind of one person, usually highly intelligent and creative. So most Masculists are more intelligent and more upper middle class than most MGTOWs in the manosphere. Masculists sneer at the opinion coming from mostly black, lower class manospherers that men don't care about the level of education of women, only about how hot, how sexy they are. Upper middle class white Masculists, on the contrary, see the FIPping of women, the creation of a FIP Society, as essential to the liberation of millions of men, since FIP women are a prerequisite for millions of men to be liberated from the horrors of the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts and fluffy decades-long man's slavery. By creating a FIP Society, millions of men benefit, hence the tremendous moral pressure coming from the Masculists on women to FIP up or to rot on the shelf. Masculists have a low opinion of lower class black manospherers who lack the intelligence to see the importance of the FIPping of women, the creation of a FIP Society for the mass liberation of men. Now the flyer itself. Are Masculists mostly upper middle class? By Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. In a word, yes. This is not surprising, since if one thinks about it, any completely new idea has to start in the brain of one person. That one person will very likely be highly intelligent and creative, since only a tiny minority of people are capable of having truly original and influential thoughts. High intelligence correlates strongly with being upper middle class. Masculism is rather new to most members of the manosphere, so that Masculists are a minority in that domain. So it is to be expected at the time of writing, that's September 2023, most Masculists are upper middle class and smarter in IQ terms than most MGTOWs and manosphere members. As a Masculist theorist and regular Masculist video content maker myself, I get annoyed by the lack of vision and intelligence of many of the MGTOWs in the manosphere. One comment I got, which struck a chord with me, said that, quote, "The educational level of the manosphere," and open brackets, and particularly of the video storage site we were both active on, close brackets, "is rather low," end quote. I had to agree with him. What particularly strikes me is that there is a disproportionate number of US blacks in the manosphere than whites. And since blacks are on average 15 IQ points dumber than whites in the US, it's not surprising that I tend to ridicule the stupidity and lack of vision of the opinions given in the comments and videos coming from these US blacks. Often they can't even spell and/or are too lazy to edit what they write, to detect typos and other grammatical faults. The general opinion of these manosphere blacks and others that I particularly dislike and don't agree with is the idea that men don't care about a woman's degrees, only about how hot, how sexy she is. This benighted opinion I find rather middle-class mindless, not well thought out, and rather short-sighted. It reminds me of the same kind of lack of foresight and lack of upper middle class thinking of the middle class, and particularly of the lower class, when it comes to the popularity of tattoos. The upper middle class are smarter than average, which is one of the major reasons why they are upper middle class. With their superior brains, they are better able to project themselves into their futures, anticipating how they will be thinking a decade from now, 2 decades, 3. The lower class are far less able to project themselves into their futures, so tend to think very short term, making decisions on how they feel at the moment. There's probably quite a high correlation between being lower class and having tattoos. Upper middle class people with their higher average intelligence will very probably think the following about having a tattoo. Quote, I might think this new tattoo I'm thinking of getting is cool for the moment, but how will I think about it a decade from now, 2 decades from now, etc. End quote. Googling shows that in practice, if the tattoo is small, then 2/3 of people later regret having had it. Interestingly, if the tattoo is large, then the regret level is lower. Upper middle class people are better able to think through their futures, so think more carefully about how their decisions will influence their futures. In the case of upper middle class masculists, they have quite different attitudes towards what they expect and desire from women than do lower classes. A particularly striking difference between the classes is on whether it is important or not for a potential female partner to be career competent or not. As stated above, the black manospherers tend to say that degrees held by women are not important to men, who really only care about how sexy a woman is. This attitude to upper middle class manospherers, and particularly to Masculists, seems just plain dumb and dismissible, since with upper middle class Masculist reasoning, a woman's ability to be FIP, in brackets, financially independent person, is of critical importance. Why do upper middle class Masculists say this? To answer this question, you need to understand Masculist ideas and the Masculist political agenda for men. I'll give a brief rundown on what the Masculists want in order to spell out why the FIPping of women, the creation of a FIP Society, is so important to Masculists, and hence the strong emphasis placed on the need for a woman to be a FIP, if a Masculist is to even look at her and not cross her off immediately as a career incompetent bimbo who is not bothered to FIP up and expects to be able to live off the money and labour of a manslavable man, leeching off him for decades, thus manslaving him, and for one father in 4, divorce raping him in the hated, fluffy feminist controlled divorce court system. Masculists, in all their upper middle class vision and intelligence, see clearly that the FIPping of women, the creation of a FIP society where both boys and girls are socialised and educated to be FIPs, will go a long way towards solving the problems of the Masculists, that is, getting rid of manslavery, of divorce rape, of forced fathering and other horrible decades-lasting gender crimes that women commit against men, which makes these gender criminal women so hated by the Masculists, who aim to effectively exterminate them by totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them, so that their fluffy manslaving genes are removed from the gene pool, being forced to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and spat at. When nearly all women are FIPs, the divorce courts can be fundamentally reformed. They can be based on the principle of financial independence of both divorcing parties, that is the mother and the father, so that alimony can be thrown out because women are FIPs. Half of man's wealth and stuff will not be given to his ex-wife because women are FIPs. Custody of the kids will be given jointly by default because women are FIPs. In other words, Masculist theorists see clearly that the creation of a FIP society will solve most of men's gender problems for millions of men. So this Masculist vision translates into a moral pressure coming from Masculists onto women to FIP up, so that women pull their own financial weight and not expect fluffy style to parasite off the labour and money of a man for decades of his life, thus making her a hated, manslaving, divorce raping, forced fathering, fluffie parasite in the eyes of the Masculists, the type of woman whom the Masculists aim to wipe off the face of the earth, seeing such women as the enemy whom the Masculists are at war against and aim to destroy. So, when an upper middle class Masculist hears over and over again the opinion coming from dumber lower class blacks and other groups that men only care about a woman's looks and care nothing about how academically and career qualified she is, the Masculists sneer, thinking, quote, "Another dumb black!" exclamation mark. They have the horizons of mice. They just don't see that women who aren't FIPs are oppressive to men, since fluffies, the opposite of FIPs, want to be manslavers and divorce rapists of men, oppressing men severely. No wonder upper middle class Masculists sneer at the stupid short-term vision of these dumber lower class blacks and similarly opinioned groups. Also, research shows that when the smartest top 10% of the population has been converted to a new belief, the remaining 90% then follows. So the Masculists tend to aim their ideas at the top 10% of men, so that when the smartest 10% of men have been masculisted, the rest of the male population will follow. So for the next few years, Masculist theorists like myself are aiming to persuade the smartest 10% of men, converting them to the Masculist way of thinking and simply ignoring the dumber 90% of men, especially the lower class blacks who are so much dumber than the whites, in brackets. In the US, the average black is 15 IQ points dumber than the average white. In Africa, that difference is double. For example, the average white South African IQ is 100, and there are 1 billion black Africans with an average IQ of only 70. In the country I currently live in, Australia, the Aborigines are even dumber, with an average IQ of only 60. The crime rate of US blacks is about 5 times higher than that of the whites, and interestingly, about equal to the crime rate of blacks in Africa. In Australia, the Aborigines have the planet's highest crime rate, close brackets. Close brackets. Since blacks are the dumbest group on the planet and have the highest crime rate as well, it goes without saying that I have a low opinion of blacks. So as a Masculist, I don't have much hope or expectation that my Masculist opinions will be very influential in the short term on dumber, lower class blacks. So I'm aiming more at fellow upper middle class whites who have the intelligence needed to be able to see that it's necessary for women to FIP up, to create a FIP society, so that social reforms are made to men-fair the gender laws, so that millions of men can be liberated from the hated gender crimes of women, particularly from the big three of women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, and women's forced fathering, all three being horrible, decades-lasting gender crimes against men that make even rape seem like small beer in comparison. So for the next few years, Masculists, and particularly Masculist theorists like myself, will be pitching our Masculist message at fellow upper middle class whites, aiming to persuade the smartest 10% of men to become masculisted, expecting that once that has happened, the rest of men and society will follow along, as research has shown in many historical instances. So for the next few years, most Masculists will be upper middle class. Then over time, over a few more years, the middle class will be masculisted, then middle class blacks, and finally the lower class whites and blacks will be masculisted. That is the likely progression of events as Masculist ideas spread across the planet, across the classes, and across IQ brackets. So if you have a high IQ and you are upper middle class, then you are a prime target for the Masculists to try to convert you to persuade you to become masculisted, seeing how gender oppression is very much a two-way street, and that women oppress men far worse than vice versa, and that women, thanks to men, have a life expectancy of 85 years and hence a career window of half a century. So have a powerful moral obligation to FIP up and pull their own financial weight by getting a career competent education so that they can be FIPs as adults and not manslave and divorce rape a man for decades of his life. Those manospherers who don't see the importance of the FIPping of women, of the importance that upper middle class women get good career competent degrees so that they don't manslave men, then expect these lower class manospherers to be sneered at by the upper middle class masculists who simply ignore such men, usually black lower class men, seeing them as being both myopic and dumb. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man's Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 640 plus Masculist flyers for men's studies courses, freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. These flyers are available in text and video formats on Minds, BitChute, Odyssey, and MGTOW.tv. Ciao.